The Echo of the Wound, Understanding Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. The story begins not in a classroom or on a stage, but in the quiet corners of history, the fields, ships, and auction blocks where millions of African men, women, and children were torn from their names, languages, and kin. The air was thick with terror and defiance, and the trauma did not end when the chains came off. It sank deep into the soul of a people, carried like an unhealed scar from generation to generation. Dr. Joy Degruy, a scholar and social scientist with a commitment to truth-telling, entered that history with a question most had been too weary to ask. What happens to a people when their suffering goes unacknowledged for 400 years? Her answer became a theory, and later, a movement called post-traumatic slave syndrome, PTSS. She didn't mean it as a label, but as a mirror, reflecting both the pain and the endurance of African Americans whose present-day struggles are often misread or misunderstood. Dr. Degruy began by tracing the human wreckage of slavery, the separation of families, the breaking of language, the violent denial of self-worth. This trauma, she explained, didn't evaporate with the Emancipation Proclamation. The people were declared free, but freedom without healing is just another form of survival. The wounds went unbandaged, carried silently into Reconstruction, Jim Crow, segregation, and the thinly veiled racism of modern institutions. Like a river that remembers its source, the effects of that trauma flowed forward in time. Parents taught their children how to survive in a world that still saw them as less. Sometimes that meant being overly strict, a way of saying, "I'm tough on you because the world will be tougher." Sometimes it meant mistrusting authority, a habit born from centuries of betrayal. These were not character flaws, they were adaptive survival behaviors, ways to endure when dignity was denied. But trauma, when unhealed, can turn inward. Dr. Degruy spoke of vacant esteem, a hollow space where self-worth should reside, and ever-present anger, a smoldering ache for justice that has too often been pathologized rather than understood. She saw these not as signs of weakness, but as signals from a wounded history still waiting to be acknowledged. In her lectures, she would sometimes pause and ask her audience to imagine something. If a single traumatic event can alter one person's life, what happens when that trauma lasts for centuries and affects an entire people? The silence that followed her question often said more than words could. Yet, Dr. Degruy did not stop at diagnosis. Her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing, turns a sharp corner toward hope. She insists that healing is possible, but only when truth is faced and stories are told. She calls for acknowledgement, not guilt, but understanding, for apology, not empty words, but accountability, for reconnection, a return to cultural pride, spiritual wholeness, and collective memory. Healing, she says, must happen both in hearts and in systems. Her vision is deeply spiritual, the belief that a people who have endured the unimaginable can also rebuild the unimaginable, faith, family, and future, if they are given space to heal. Through her work, Dr. Degruy has become a kind of modern griot, telling the story that America tried to forget. In her voice, pain and power intertwine. She reminds her listeners that trauma may be inherited, but so is resilience, and the same blood that remembers the wound also remembers the song. You can't heal what you don't acknowledge, she says, but once you do, you can reclaim everything that was taken. So the story continues, in classrooms, churches, family circles, and community halls, wherever people are ready to listen, to learn, and to heal. The echo of the wound may linger, but in Dr. Joy Degruy's telling, so does the promise of restoration.